Today, we're looking at one of Japan's most famous prehistoric sites, Sannai-Maruyama. It's a place that completely rewrote the book on the ancient Jomon period. But we're here because of one staggering allegation, that the official story is basically a carefully constructed work of fiction. Okay, let's get right into it.
So first, let's cover the official story. The Sannai-Maruyama site is, well, it's the crown jewel of Japanese prehistory. It's pitched as this massive, surprisingly sophisticated settlement from the Jomon period. You know, a hunter-gatherer culture that was around for thousands of years. The reconstruction of the village, with these giant wooden towers, is a huge tourist draw and a real cornerstone of how Japan sees its ancient past.
But what if that incredible reconstruction, the one you see in textbooks, the one that wows thousands of visitors, isn't actually based on solid evidence? What if it all started with an exaggeration that just kind of spiraled out of control? That is the bombshell claim from a critic inside the world of archaeology, and it's what we're unpacking today.
All right, to really get to the bottom of this, we're going to treat it like an investigative case file. First up, we'll cover the official story of this so-called Jomon metropolis. Then we'll dig into the first cracks in that story and look at a 1994 illustration the critic calls the smoking gun. From there, we'll follow a trail of what he calls troubling data, see what verdict he reaches, and finally, try to figure out what's really on trial here.
So let's kick things off with Section 1. The Jomon metropolis. To really get why this is such a big deal, you have to understand just how important this site became. I mean, ever since it was discovered back in '92, Sannai-Maruyama has been praised for totally changing our view of the ancient Jomon people.
I mean, look at the accolades. It's a special national historic site. That's a huge deal. It's known far and wide as the largest Jomon settlement ever found. The whole reconstruction is based on the idea that about 500 people lived there at its peak. It's in school books, and its bid to become a UNESCO World Heritage Site has been this point of huge national pride. This is the story we've all been told.
Okay, so that's the official narrative. Now for Section 2, where we start to see some cracks appear in that foundation. The challenge comes from a 2018 book by an archaeologist named Katsuhiko Suzuki. And listen, he isn't just saying a few minor mistakes were made, he's arguing the entire giant settlement story is a total fabrication.
And Suzuki, right out of the gate, raises the stakes with this quote. He calls this whole thing more clever and complex than Japan's infamous early Paleolithic hoax. Now, just so you know, that was a massive scandal where a top archaeologist was caught literally planting fake artifacts in the ground for years, fooling pretty much everyone. So by bringing that up, Suzuki is signaling he's not talking about an honest mistake. He's alleging a deliberate, complex deception.
So where does an accusation like that even come from? This brings us to Section 3. Suzuki points to what he says is the smoking gun of the entire affair. And it's not an artifact, it's not a bone, it's an artist's drawing that was published in a magazine way back in 1994. To get why that illustration is so critical, we have to know what was actually known back in 1994. After a year and a half of non-stop digging, how many houses, how many dwellings had they actually found and confirmed? The answer is this number. 23. That's it. Just 23 homes.
And here's the core of it. With only 23 dwellings actually found, that 1994 illustration showed this sprawling city complete with massive towers in areas that, well, they hadn't even been dug up yet. The argument is that this imaginative drawing effectively became the blueprint. The exciting story was created on paper first, and he alleges that all the work that came later was about trying to make the archaeology fit that picture, not the other way around.
Okay, moving on to Section 4. The smoking gun drawing is one piece of the puzzle, but Suzuki's case also goes deep into the official scientific reports. He claims that over 25 years, the reports have been so full of inconsistencies and flaws that it's basically impossible for any other scientist to actually check if the big claims are true.
Take this data on dwelling numbers, for example. The final report shows the number of homes jumping from 44 in the early phase to a whopping 183 in the middle. That's more than a four-fold increase before crashing back down. Now, did some huge, short-lived population boom really happen? Suzuki is deeply skeptical. He asks, is this real history we're looking at,
or is it just the result of messy data and bad analysis?
And this brings us to a really key idea in archaeology: the just-in-time settlement. See, it's one thing to say, hey, we found 183 house pits built over a few hundred years. But to claim 500 people lived there, you have to prove how many houses were standing and actually being lived in at the exact same time. And that specific number, Suzuki argues, is the critical missing piece. After 25 years of research, he says that just-in-time number has never been scientifically proven.
The author's takedown of the final report is just scathing. He says he found maps that were changed between different versions, artifact ID numbers that were missing, which makes it impossible for anyone else to verify the work, and data that just plain doesn't add up. And maybe the biggest red flag of all, that phrase, giant settlement, which was used in all the PR for decades, is nowhere to be found in the final scientific report. The author just calls the whole thing shameful and amateurish.
So after all that, where does this leave us? In Section 5, we get the author's final verdict. After laying out all this evidence, he doesn't just conclude that it's a bunch of mistakes. No, he frames it as something much, much more serious, what he calls an archaeological crime.
Let's go back to that Paleolithic hoax comparison for a second. That scandal, as big as it was about one guy, a single rogue archaeologist acting alone to get famous. What Suzuki is alleging here is totally different. He says this wasn't one person's crime, it was an organizational effort, where entire committees and government bodies allegedly kept pushing an exciting but unproven story, bankrolled by millions in public money.
In the end, the author places the blame squarely on the excavation committee and the local board of education. He straight up accuses them of overseeing what he calls a fabricated settlement, a grand vision that was born from that 1994 illustration and built, in his words, on imagination alone.
So after all these incredibly heavy accusations, what happens now? That brings us to our final section, History on Trial. Because this isn't just some academic debate. The author argues this is about scientific integrity, it's about public trust, and it's about the very story of Japan's ancient past. And because the stakes are so high, he has a very clear call to action.
Suzuki's demands are threefold. First, he wants a totally independent third-party committee to recheck all the data from day one, just like they did after the Paleolithic hoax. Second, he demands that the Board of Education publicly answer for all these alleged flaws. And finally, he insists that the UNESCO World Heritage application be pulled immediately. He basically argues it would be a national embarrassment to push for it while such serious doubts exist.
In the end, whether these allegations turn out to be true or false, the whole controversy forces us to think about a really fundamental question. It shows just how thin the line can be between scientific interpretation and pure invention, and the immense pressure and responsibility that comes with it. It leaves us with this thought. When our history is literally dug up from the ground, who gets to decide what story it tells?